Hello everyone, my name is Javier Gomez, member of the UDS technical team, and in this video we're going to see how to configure a Windows application starting with an RDS server. So let's start and let's go to our UDS platform. We'll go here. As you can see, you can put your IP or your DNS name, whatever you need. And let's get inside with an administrator user. Okay, so once inside, we'll go to our dashboard. Here we go, and the first thing that we're going to do is to select our service provider. In this case, as you all surely know, we're going to need an RDS platform provider, so let's click on it. Okay, here we go. So we're going to need a name. In this case, let's see, I'm going to put RDS server. Here we go. And here in list of servers, we are going to put the IP of our server. In the case that we have more than one RDS server, we can put it here. And in the case that there's a crash or malfunction, it will try to connect to the second one or the third one that we have. Don't forget to click the server checking. Okay, so on the user mapping, we can choose the user and the password that we're going to need for the application when you are going to log in with an authenticator that is not an Active Directory. So for example, when I log in into UDS with a user that's not in the Active Directory, you can indicate here a user that is in the domain, so you can start the application. So you can use mapping here. Another option is the AD user management. You can create the users in your domain, so when you access with an internal database, for example, or for another authenticator, you will create a user inside of the domain with the username and password that you have told it here. So these two options are not going to be used right now, but just for you to know. And also in our documentation, you can have a lot of things to know how to use it and explain very well. So we'll go here, let's check everything is okay. We'll click on test, and it was test successfully, so we can click on save. So once the RDS server is created, we are going to create a service inside of him. In the service tab, we'll click on new RDS platform. We'll put a name for the app. In this case, we're going to use Paint, and the application path. This will be the path of the application that we are going to use. We have it right here. Here we go. Windows System 32 MS Paint .exe in my case, and normally it's always here. So let's see, in the max allow services tab, you can put the maximum service that you want to have. If you put 0, there's no limit, but for example, if you have 50 users, you can put here you always want to have 50 as maximum, and of course 0 means that you have no limit. We're going to leave it in 0 for my case. And in the advanced tab, we're going to leave it as default. In this case, we're going to leave this by default, and we'll click on save. Okay, once it's saved, let's go for the authenticator part. As you can see, in my case, I have 2 authenticators, an internal database, then we have the administrator user and an Active Directory. In this case, I'll show you right here. Just talk a bit about it. To see the configuration, we have its name, Active Directory, the priority, the label, the IP of the host. In the advanced tab, it's left by default, the credentials. You will need a user that has privileges or read privileges on the base that you are selecting. In this case, we're using administrator, but this is only for the demo. You can use another one that only has lecture privileges. and in display we'll leave it on yes. So once this is okay, let's go for the OS manager. The OS manager in this case is going to be an RDS OS manager. So let's tell him what name do we want. RDS OS manager in my case. Here in the max session time, well, it's put in hours, the maximum time of the session that it's going to have. In this case, it's going to have 24. So let's leave it here. You can put whatever you need, of course. So the next part, let's go for our transports. What protocol, what transports are we going to use? We'll check here. So let's click on new. We'll create 3 of them. The first will be a direct transport into our RDS server. We'll put our name, RDS direct, the priority that we want it to have. In this case, we're going to leave it 1. The network access, we'll leave it by default. In the credentials part, we don't need to put anything because we don't have a domain, and it's going to be a user of the Active Directory. So in the parameters, we are going to leave it by default, and here you can check what server you're also going to use, the printers, the smart cards, the drives. You can leave it by default. And the display part, you can check the color depth that you want to use, the font smoothing if you need it, you can see a bit better, but for my case we'll leave it by default. And in the Linux client part, in this case we're going to leave it by default too. So we'll click on save. Now we'll go for the tunnel connections. This connection will going to be used through the tunneler. So let's start for the RDS apps. Let's put a name, RDS, what we want, tunnel connection. We'll put the priority. Let's put 2 to this one. In this case, 1 is the biggest priority, 2 will be less priority. The credentials will leave it by default. And in the tunnel part, we'll put the IP of our tunnel and the port that we are using. You could use the public IP, the IP, or the DNS name, whatever you have. We're going to use our local direction here. But of course, this will only be accessible but inside my connections. So 192.168.051, and the port that we're going to use in my case, that it's 443. And the parameters the same as before, and display it's same as before. We're going to leave it by default, and the Linux client part the same. So we'll click on save. Okay, for the last ones, we're going to be HTML5 RDS or RDS. Okay, let's go. Let's click in new. The name we're going to be RDS HTML5 in this case. Priority here we'll put 3. And in the tunnel server we'll put the IP or DNS name of our server. And the port if needed, of course. In my case it's 10.443. Credentials will leave it by default. And in the parameter section, we will going to leave it also by default. You can enable audio printing, for example, but in my case we're not going to use it. And we're going to leave the advanced tab also by default. Remember that if you want to force to the connections open in the same window or override the one that you have, here you can click it. In my case, we're going to leave it to open every connection on the same window. So we'll click on save and we'll leave it here. So once we have our 3 transports configured, we'll go to our service pool. In the service pool section, we'll click on new, and the same as before, let's create a new name, paint, the base service that we created before. Remember RDS paint. and the OS manager that we created before, RDS OS manager. In the display, remember to always leave it visible if you want people to see it, the image that you want, the pool that you want it to show. In the advanced tab, we're going to leave it by default, and the availability tab for the application, this is not needed, so you can't touch anything here, and we click on save. So once we have it, let's get inside. Let's tell him what group of what transports we want. The new group, we'll click here Active Directory, and the group that I already have, that it's UDS. So next will be the transports. We'll have to assign every transport that we created. So let's show off the right ones, HTML5 and the tunnel ones. Great, now we should see them. So let's log out with the administrator. Now let's get inside with the Active Directory. Let's check for a user that it's inside the Active Directory. Let's log in, and as you can see, here is our paying service. In the connection part, we can see our free connections that are sorted by the priority that we chose. The RDS.1 had 1 priority, Tunnel had 2, and HTML5 has 3. So the lesser the number, the smaller the number, the higher priority we have. So now let's try and see how this works. So let's start with the RDS direct connection. We want to open our client. As you can see, we'll click on it. As you can see, it's starting to enter with the user. Here we go, we can have a paint functioning correctly. Let's close it. Now let's try for the tunnel connections. Let's try the HTML5 connection. Okay, it will open in a new tab, and here we go. Our paint totally functioning in a new tab. Of course, you can choose this. Remember, I said I wanted it to be in a new tab. So let's close this, and now we'll go for RDS, but the tunnel connection. It should be exactly the same, but in this case it's going to be through the tunnel. We will open our UDS client, and it will connect to that machine. Here it's doing the login with the user. Let's give it a second, and here we go. We have the same application, totally functioning. The only difference is it's being used by the tunneler. So we can close this already, and here we go. Now we have our Windows application paint for our users. Thank you very much for your time, and bye.